Now we got the kick-ass quadruple of Team RWBY, and let's start with pretty much the titular character as it were, Ruby Rose. Now while she's round about the head main character of the show, Ruby's actually one of the more muted characters in what big events she partaked in this volume. Which is okay given other characters got bigger and more important events on hand. And it's not like Ruby was a wallflower, as she did have her own moments and was still active in a lot of events. Any moment of importance she was a part of, she played a supportive role, playing off events around her, not so much being personally affected by it. Like when Blake was at a breaking point, she was a part of the team trying to help out, but wasn't the one with the solution. The chat with Ozpin was a moment for Ruby, but it's one that also affects all of the next generation, not just her. Other than that, she had her small moments interacting with Cinder and co, unbeknownst to her, to slowly form a link between the woman that she met in the first episode and eventually Cinder when she reveals herself. The only moment that truly affected Ruby beyond fights was when she accepted Penny for the girl and not the machine, when she was fully disclosed on Penny's identity, which of course builds up their bond for Penny's eventual big moments in the future, whatever they may be, and showcases more of Ruby's welcoming and innocent heart even amongst the world that she is a part of, always trying to make people happy and seeing the good in them. In short, Ruby had kind of a similar role that Yang did in Volume 1, the bystander aware of issues and oftentimes a reactor to them, but not necessarily the one most affected, nor the one involved in its solution, which, again, isn't bad for her, and it's fine for her to play that role sometimes, and not always be the main focus, especially when one would believe she'll have more to deal with in the near future. The same could be said for her partner Weiss, who, while having more to personally deal with, was also not the major face of prevalent plot points. She, like Ruby, was more someone who was a part of another character's arc, and not necessarily the arc's biggest benefactor. But she is definitely gaining more flavors and is showing more to her. Unlike a lot of last volume, she's more open to her team's more lively natures and isn't busting Ruby's back over her goofy and jovial moments, as much as before at least, and the two look more of a tighter pair, as one would expect given time and experiences shared as a pair and as a team as well. The issue of Ruby being the leader seems to be a dead issue now. She does admittedly still have some of those instances of being annoyed with others, but she's also making puns like Yang, joining in with a food fight, playing cards, whatever the heck this was, hugging Ruby, and even sharing some personal stuff with her teammates, and was pivotal in noticing Blake's initial stress. From the Oobleck chatting after her initial response of what she knew that she could fight she felt she had to, she admitted to Yang and Blake that her reason of wanting to be a huntress is more like a drive to reclaim some good standing to the Schnee name, that she's very aware her father is stained, feeling being a huntress is the way to do that, and it's great to see in the end not just her opening up more with others to even share such feelings, but at last hearing her thoughts on her father's apparently negative actions. She also dropped on us the mention of a sister named Winter, with signs that also there may be a broken connection between the heiress and her family, hinted at when Weiss was practicing smiles when making a call to the family business, seemingly to avoid any possible response. It looks to be those very actions of her father that stained the Schnee name that for Weiss has formed this wall between herself and her family, though it could also be tied to Weiss wanting to be a huntress in the first place, even trying to do so without her dad's approval. And there's also the question of what is Weiss's stance with her sister. On top of that, she was also the continued target of Jean's infatuation, and of course she in return continued to shrug those feelings off. But also she formed her own crush on the new boy in town, Neptune, though as I touched on before, it is interesting that she was so open to his flirts when they were very similar to Jean's, even though she herself said that it's not the first time that she's been flirted with. So what, she really likes bright blue hair? And while she was more the middlewoman of this arc where more focus was on the others involved, it did look to end up with Neptune looking to make up for his selfish actions beforehand to Weiss's invite, and even gaining Jean some points in Weiss's eyes, given this look. I'd like to see Weiss and Jean have some form of a friendlier relationship now it seems that any present romantic edge is passed on, as I think they've got a good chemistry, and it's nice that Jean may have finally gotten some respect from Weiss after being viewed so negatively until now. In the end, like Ruby, She may have been behind others for the brunt of focus time, but I still feel we had enough to save her on even if she wasn't center stage. One girl who definitely had a fair amount to do this volume was the resident cat girl, Blake. Fresh off of having the bulk of last volume's final arc be her story, she continued with it right off the bat and, for about 9 times out of 10, had her personal arc be her singular focus in this volume. Yes, while she did have a quiet moment of calmness and having her head in the clouds in the first episode before going knee deep into the food fight, the following episode continued from where her arc left off with her battle against the White Fang, only this time mixing in her newfound friends, growing her bonds with them in the process. While clearly having her mind elsewhere, being as personally invested into stopping the White Fang as she is, this volume really gave Blake a more warm growth where by the end of it, you can see that she's more content to accept that she's now out of the shadow of the White Fang and with some strong friends and support that she may not have had before now, while she's fighting against the discrimination as a peacekeeper rather than a protester or a rebel. Her tighter bonds even lead to the same girl who drove her off initially once her identity was revealed, and is someone whose father has had major impacts on her kind, being the one who noticed Blake's secluded attitude and forced her to follow on a promise that she made to her and her friends. One of those small moments with some growth to it that affected both of these two, showing that Weiss really is taking her new friend seriously, and Blake too, when she ended up opening up, being genuinely happy once her teammates understood her feelings towards fear of the unknown to the White Fang's actions, and deciding as a team to do something about it. This after we've seen via flashback that she still had a very solo-minded drive, and yet now you can imagine that she's happy at this point that she's not alone, shown when she was showcasing it to Sun, who she's continued to show a good chemistry with both socially and in battle. She did of course have a big breakdown, going really deep into the rabbit hole with her fears, knowing something big is on the horizon from the White Fang, and that fear tests her resolve and confidence. Even more so when her closer than ever friends have come back from the previous investigation and went right back into letting their hair down for an upcoming dance, leaving her worn out and stressed. Where even her friends trying to help her out once more didn't even work, until a certain yellow-haired girl gave her a push and then some. Afterwards, she comes out knowing that her surroundings and allies can allow her a chance to cool down. The burden isn't hers to carry alone anymore. For her part in Oobleck's quizzing, she laid a voice to her friends why she took this route of wanting to be a huntress, to aid in stopping the negative faunus treatment, accepting she did so because the way the public eye views the profession in high regard, and if she could succeed in this line of work, she feels it would go some way into changing people's mind on her kind, though she doesn't know how to really achieve that exact success. And hey, let's have her finally bring up the topic of Adam too, and even accepting that she's ran away from many of her problems rather than confronting them. Clearly Blake wasn't bored and had plenty to deal with in volume 2. It's a heck of a lot for one character in the show to deal with for a volume. She also added to her already large combat talent with unique tricks in tandem with her semblance and dust powers, but she's carrying a lot of the show's narrative points on top of her own developments, especially as the show's major phase of the faunus discrimination plot point. And yet, for me, it's still written quite well with all this tied to the character. I said early on in my reviews that she's one of my favourites in the show, and it remains so now. And it looks like she's not going to have a quiet time come volume 3 either, now that her former partner Adam is on the scene, and at some point we have to expect that the two meeting again will come along, and it will be Blake's biggest moment in the show so far, whether they clash or keep things to chatter, since it has been built up since the trailer. I do hope that she's not being overplayed as the focus, but she's still one of the show's bright sparks, and the volume here didn't change that. But probably someone who had her own noteworthy focus, and some much needed ones at that, was her partner, and the last character to talk about, Yang. Now before volume 2 started, I had really hoped that Yang would have an important stamp on the show, beyond fighting. And while she definitely still made a mark with her fists, and even with an ineffective junior meetup, we finally got Yang focused content, and a chance to take her out of watching from the side and to be in a focused role. Firstly, she's got herself quite the little rivalry going on with Neo, leading into one of the best one-to-one fights in the show so far, and their conflicting styles make for great combat chemistry. especially playing off the expanded information we know of now in terms of Yang's semblance. While Yang may sound OP with that ability to get stronger with damage she takes, if Yang's not able to land a blow, or if she takes too much damage where she's KO'd, then it's all for naught. A big gain from the loss that she had to Neo was actually seeing Yang lose a fight, since she has been on a hot streak most of the show. But of course the biggest moment for Miss Xiao Long came from the stressed Blake situation and the chat with RWBY, which I'll go into first. The doc opened up questioning with Yang, and even with the responses of Blake and Weiss, Yang had probably the most interesting and human reason to wanting to be a huntress. She is, in her own words, a thrill seeker. We see that with her attitude, her mannerisms with tense situations like the club and flying into the test in Volume 1, and her bike. She's the sort of girl who wants to see each day with a new excitement and see what it is that it brings, something she felt she could get out of being a huntress, and aiding people from taking that job is just an added bonus. A bit of a contrast from her sister RWBY, who's more into it for the sake of helping people and finding enjoyment and excitement in that, no matter the adventure. I think Yang's reasoning makes her quite the interesting character, something I didn't expect to see accompanying her personality like that. And of course before that, we had her addressing her biggest drive in general, and something hardly touched on previously, that being her and RWBY's past, and the actual ties as sisters. After being heavily debated since we first found out that Yang didn't share RWBY's last name, despite being sisters, we finally know now that they are paternal half-sisters. Tai Yang is their father. His first wife, Yang's mother, left at some point, and their teammate Summer Rose would later become Tai Yang's second wife, and Yang's stepmother, and them all living quite well until Summer's passing. This second loss of a loved one emotionally shutting down Tai Yang. RWBY herself was too young to really understand things at that time, but for Yang, she would eventually begin what would soon be a lifelong mission, to find out what happened to her birth mother and maybe even find her. This mission ended up leading to an event that Yang uses in present day to try and aid Blake with her current situation, which I believe to be quite a brilliant moment in this story. Blake at some point of course would have to be snapped out of a slump, and it could have gone in many ways. A lot of them could have been poor. But here we not only got a snippet of Yang and RWBY's past, but it was also a moment that explored a new side to Yang, and some reasoning behind some of her motherly sides that she has with RWBY, on top of being that connection to aid in Blake's situation, backing up her statements for Blake needing to pace herself and not let her goals be her sole purpose in action in life. Yang was solely focused on finding her mother, and it almost cost her and RWBY's lives, if not for Crow, the other member of Tai Yang, Summer, and Yang's mother's team. And it's something that Yang has carried as an example of not pushing herself too far, and balancing enjoying life with her search for her mum. This was hands down one of the best scenes in the show for me, because of all that it accomplished. It was a heartwarming moment for the show, a chance to see more to Yang, and it was a great strengthening moment for her relationship with Blake, with Yang trusting Blake with such a personal story to begin with, as well as providing answers to many questions, as well as providing new ones down in a way that's fulfilling and yet enticing to see where this leads, and it proved to be a shot in the arm that Yang needed in my eyes. Of course, we also got the situation with Raven, and again, I feel this scene might not be what it appears to be, but at least it gives comfort that Yang hopefully won't be diverting back into the shadows come Volume 3 and beyond, and will have more to deal with. It was a much more rewarding volume for Miss Xiao Long for me, and I'm glad she's finally feeling like one of the major cast. Now to top this all off, I'm gonna give my top 3 characters of the volume, and top 3 characters I hope get a stronger volume next time. Third place in needing for me a better volume is actually a pair, Ren and Nora. Well, hardly a terrible outing for them, let me just point that out. It does seem like we'll get some focus for them in the next volume, or soon enough. And with 2 volumes focused more on their teammates, and them coming up with smaller moments of enjoyment, I feel it's time for the pair to be allowed to step up. Second place goes to the collective of Junior, Melanie, and Militia. Despite being in the intro, they all ended up having no real effects on events, and felt really wasted. The reason why they're not number 1 is because they aren't exactly major characters, but I do feel that they can provide something better than what they had. And the character that I feel needs the most in terms of a strong volume is Neptune. After a decent opening and some bright sparks, he had for me a rather lukewarm ending, and definitely needs a moment to shine beyond the cool guy persona that he's made, as well as needing time with his full team to see more sides to him and them as a collective. But now we end with the top 3 characters of the volume for me, with 3rd place going to James Ironwood. The standout in my eyes are the debutant faces, and the ignition to some growth in some characters that have been desperate for some, making a strong impact on other characters as well, as the kickstarter to reactions to events outside of those relegated to just Veil alone. 2nd place goes to Yang, after finally getting something emotionally engaging and letting us see some more intriguing sides to her, and it providing some of the best moments of the volume, as well as being equally entertaining as ever throughout battles or just being casual. But I gotta hand my 1st place ribbon to her partner, Blake, for having a very entertaining and engaging rollercoaster of emotions and continuing a strong showing carrying a lot of plot points on her shoulders. But as a whole, how do I feel about the characters in this volume? Quite well, honestly. For as much as some didn't hit the mark, wasn't given a fair amount to deal with, or had a quite twisty-turny time, the character performance and screen time as a whole feels very decently balanced. Even with a host of new faces coming in, and is aided by a handful of the cast bringing up a strong abundance of personal bright sparks that shone very brightly. Some did feel like they're still waiting for their first big moment, but the good pick of the bunch that are continuing to grow do help me warrant giving the character portrayals this volume as a whole a 4 out of 5.